Well, we're beginning the Book of Lamentations. Lamentations now is the 25th book in the Old Testament. We've been through 25 books now, and it's the third book of the 5 major prophets. If you recall the end of Jeremiah, Judah now is in Babylon, in captivity. And Lamentations now looks backwards in time over the woeful, devastating condition of Jerusalem, which had come about as a direct result of God punishing his people for their sins. If you look in Lamentations chapter 1, verses 1 to 3, this is how Jeremiah speaks of the sadness and the sorrows of Zion, or of Jerusalem. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. She has become like a widow who was once great among the nations. She who was a princess among the provinces has become a forced laborer. She weeps bitterly in the night, and her tears are on her cheeks. She has none to comfort her. Among all her lovers, all her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. Judah has gone into exile under affliction and under harsh servitude. She dwells among the nations, but she has found no rest. All her pursuers have overtaken her in the midst of distress. The theme here of Lamentations is an eyewitness account of the consequences of Judah's sins. And it's also a look at the proper attitudes of repentance and longing for the mercy of God. Lamentations chapter 5. Jeremy, I'll get you to read that. Lamentations chapter 5, verses 21 and 22.
Turn you us unto thee, O Lord, and we shall be turned. Renew our days as of old. But you have utterly rejected us. You are very wroth against us.
Okay. A shocking thought, isn't it, what we just read of what Jerusalem now looks like and the condition the people are in. And these words that Jeremy just read, the people knew that. But they put that out of their minds. And now, of course, it has come back to them. And lament. We think about the word lament, Lamentations. Lament is a word that kind of has fallen on hard times. A theologian by the name of B.B. Warfield said this about the word lament. He said, "It is sad to witness the death of any worthy thing, even a word." We don't use lament too much, do we? And worthy words do die. Like any other worthy thing, if we do not take good care of them. Sadder still is the dying out of the hearts of men of the things for which the word stands. When we think of lament, we don't really think much of it. It's not a word we commonly use. And with that quote, let's answer our first question. What does it mean? What does lament mean? It's not a word that we use too much. Go ahead.
it kind of like, sort of like weeping, feeling down and reflecting on things that have happened?
Yeah, yeah. The first part is exactly. It is such as weeping. Any other thoughts? Well, all we'll add to Gord's thought is then it's deep. You know, sometimes we think of, I don't know, we lose something or we break something in our life that we really like. You know, we're sad.
They're kind of like grieving.
The which, Gord?
Grieving.
Yes, yeah. Deep sorrow. Deep sorrow. When you lose a loved one. When children lose their parents. There's a deep sorrow there. A sorrow that really you haven't experienced before. Something not as deep of a grief. Gord?
Possibly, when Peter recounted Christ saying that you're going to deny me, and he actually did and realized and basically wept bitterly, I guess that would be a form of lamenting.
Oh, exactly. That's good comparison. Yeah. You know, there's things that we sorrow about, but then, like with Gord's analogy there of Peter, you know, in situations when you lament, sometimes physically you can barely stand. The sorrow overcomes you that much, and that is the thought behind Jeremiah's book here of the Book of Lamentations. We will see through our study. You know, there's situations in this book, scenes in this book, you don't even want to try and imagine them. You know, it's how terrible, how gross, how pathetic it is. But nonetheless, it's happened. And the lessons are there for us. And so we begin with the origin of Lamentations and the title. Whoa, that went for a quick flick. The title of the origin of Lamentations. And Dave asked us, why is the book called Lamentations? And how is this title different from the Hebrew name? So maybe we'll answer just the first question. Why is it called Lamentations? Right, Gord. Right. Yeah. It reflects the state of mind its author is in. So Gord says it's a book of sorrow, of weeping, and the state of mind. That is the state of mind that the author is in, and he's in that state of mind because now he is reflecting back. He's looking back upon the consequences of Judah's sins, and then he writes what he is reflecting back upon. He writes it in a mournful and a sad tone. He's not trying to paint a picture and overlooking the harshness of the consequences of sin. He's speaking point blankly. And the Hebrew name, does anyone know what the English word meant for the Hebrew word? The Hebrew word was, I'll leave that for Jeremy, I think Etcha? Yeah, Etcha. Maybe, sounds pretty good. But in English, I thought about this for a while. The English word simply means how. How. As I thought about that, I was thinking of Jeremiah, and what he would have us see. How did this happen? Gord?
David's question is, how is this title different from it? But you think about it, when people lament or weep, how could this possibly happen? So there is usually some questions in lament. why did this have to happen?
Right.
So
Right.
I kind of disagree with it being different. It kind of supports it, but one way.
That's true. Well, sometimes it's tough coming up with how to word your question to get us to think. But that's exactly true. You know, Jeremy?
I guess it's just the Greek name or the name later would have, I guess, drawn to what the book is about. How could mean a whole bunch of different things, but it Gordis, right? And you're right. Of course, it's how with a question mark, and so we understand what it means, but getting people to the crux of the book, it's sort of like Genesis,
Right.
Meaning beginnings, or some of these other books having slightly different names, even though they mean the same thing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I thought of it maybe from the standpoint of stubborn minds, such as Judah. How? Well, really, you knew how. Why? But for maybe those that haven't witnessed the power and faithfulness of God, this is how this happened. You know. So we haven't seen this slide for a while, but remember when Jeff?
I'm just thinking in the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus gave those Beatitudes, we call them. And one of them he said that blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Sometimes people look at that and I wonder what does the Lord mean by mourn? Mourning in what way? Many people mourn. Many people are sad. Many people do wrong or are sad as a result of what they've done. I think when we look at Lamentations, we get a pretty clear idea what the Lord means. Blessed are those who mourn.
Mm-hmm.
They shall be comforted. Jeremiah seems to be a man who mourns in that godly manner. His mourning is for sin.
Right.
Just kind of goes along with what we're talking about that word lamentation. This is what the Lord meant. Blessed are those who mourn.
Right. Right. And we touch on that thought later on in the book. Where we learn so much just from that thought of mourning. So in the Septuagint, when that version was made, it called the book of Jeremiah the tears of Jeremiah. And when the Latin Vulgate was written, it called the book the Lamentations of Jeremiah. And so we just see the thoughts is the same all the way along. Jeremy?
And this is the reason why I wasn't going to say it earlier because I thought it was going to come up later. But this is where Jeremiah gets his description about the weeping prophet.
Right.
But I'll save the rest because I'm sure the author's coming up next.
It is. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. Well, and that's true. The next in the origin of Lamentations is the author. And Jewish tradition credits the writing of the book to Jeremiah, even though the book does not make such a claim. We've seen this with a lot of our Old Testament books. However, there is evidence which helps us in determining the author. And as Jeremy said, we are going to speak about that a bit. What evidence exists to confirm that Jeremiah wrote the Book of Lamentations? What evidence? Jeremy?
First of all, you already read verse 3 of chapter 1. It puts it in that time frame. Judah has gone. They haven't returned yet. So this is at least in the time period of the captivity, which of course would be Jeremiah's time period. So we know the writer, even though it's not Jeremiah that we know specifically yet, we know that the writer is not in captivity because he is lamenting that Judah has gone into captivity. But it has already happened. So we're in the proper time period.
Right. The author, as Jeremy was pointing out, he's an eyewitness of the destruction of Jerusalem. He was there. He saw it. Lamentations 1, verses 13 to 15. Naomi, do you want to read? We'll read a verse each. Lamentations chapter 1 and verses 13, 14, and 15.
From on high he sent fire into my bones. He made it descend. He spread a net for my feet. He turned me back. He has left me stunned, faint all the day long.
The yoke of my transgressions is bound by his hand. They are withered and come upon my neck. He has made my strength to fall. The Lord has delivered me into their hand, from whom I am not able to rise up.
The Lord has rejected all my strong men in my midst. He has called an appointed time against me to crush my young men. The Lord has struck me as in a riot to Christ, the virgin daughter of Judah.
Okay. Now here, the city here is regarded as a person. This is how it's being written. It's regarded as a person whose happiness in life has been destroyed. It's gone. Whose good health has been broken, and this miserable condition is represented under a figure of a yoke. That's not something commonplace in our lives. You see it in the Mennonite country. The horse or the oxen are tied together with a yoke, but it's a heavy, depressing burden to bear. That's the thought here. And it's laid by God. This yoke has been laid by God on his people for their sins. And in Lamentations 2, verses 6 to 9, we just want to notice here what belonged to God and what was owed to him. And we'll read Lamentations 2, verses 6 to 9, and we'll take a verse each. And Jonathan, do you want to read 6, please?
He has done violence to his tabernacle as if it were a garden. He has destroyed his place of assembly. The Lord has caused the appointed feasts and Sabbaths to be forgotten in time. With his burning indignation, he has destroyed the king's enemies.
And verse 7, Lisa?
The Lord was from his water. He was abandoned his sanctuary. He is given after the laws of the great forest. Gentle in yoke of the baby. They have made the month in the heart of the Lord. Take on the day of
The Lord hath purposed to destroy the wall of the daughter of Zion. He hath stretched out a line and not withdrawn his hand from destroying. Therefore he made the rampart and the wall to Lambert. They vanquished together.
Okay, thank you. What God had loved, what God had designed for purpose for his children, we see here he's destroyed them. Imagine put ourselves, that's what we need to do, put ourselves in Jeremiah's shoes. God's places of abode with Israel, where Israel could go to be in his presence, he's wiped out. He's destroyed it. His feasts and his law would be forgotten. The thought here of what God has made and had purpose, he's taken it out of the way now. It's gone. And Judah's left with nothing. The thought in verse 8, he stretched out a line in the city and destroyed it. It's gone. Colin?
Well, in God's eyes, Lord, there is a scripture that says obedience is better than sacrifice. He does not, okay, this is what he established and this is how you ought to
which should mean, reason certain things they needed to do. But really and truly, disobedience that he requires from them then and us now. God is wise in saying these things. Obedience is important.
Exactly. You're right. Obedience. Disobedience is what brought everything upon Israel. Jeremy?
And yet, from all of this, we get a song that we'll sing even later this morning. Great is thy faithfulness. From Lamentations chapter 3, verse 23. God is faithful. He is punishing them now, but he has still promised Jesus Christ through the seed of Abraham. God, great is thy faithfulness. Our faithfulness, no. God's faithfulness, yes.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just holding back thoughts on these because we are going to get into it, but it's good for us to see. As I was doing the lesson yesterday, I thought there is so much here in Lamentations for us to consider looking ahead to Judgment Day. Because everything Jeremiah wept about here, the destruction of Jerusalem, and those remnant of the faithful, what they realized, we are going to be in their shoes in Judgment Day. Not saying, we're all going to be sorry and lost, but I'm just saying we need to look at what has happened to Israel here in order that we are not in the same position on Judgment Day. And Jeremiah just depicts it so much. But I'll leave those thoughts because we do have a question and some lengthy readings on that. But the author also, we got sidetracked there, the author also employs a style. Remember, each book, each writer has his own style and phraseology that is strikingly similar to the book of Jeremiah. If you look at Lamentations chapter 1 and verse 15, this again is kind of highlighting who the author is. Lamentations 1 and verse 15. Who read last? Sandra? You read last? Yeah. Shudang, excuse me. Do you want to read Lamentations 1 verse 15?
The Lord has strength and foot all my mighty mind in my wisdom. He has called and assembled against me to crush my dumb mind and roll on as the road cross and the river down my joy.
Okay. And Freelon, do you want to go back? You go back to the book of Jeremiah. Back to the book of Jeremiah, chapter 8. Jeremiah, chapter 8, and verse 21. Okay, how is Jerusalem, how is Judah described there? What description?
Daughter.
The which?
Daughter.
Oh, right, Jeremy. A daughter. Both those verses speak of her as a daughter, which was kind of coined to Jeremiah. He used that quite a bit. Lamentations chapter 1 again, and verse 16. Henry, I'll get you to read that. And while you can be looking up Cherry, Jeremiah chapter 9. Jeremiah chapter 9 and verse 1 will be your reading. And Henry, you've got Lamentations 1 and 16.
Yes. For those days are weak. I overflows with water, because they come from me. The force of the destroy my life is far from me. My children are desolate, because the enemy prevails.
Oh, that rock says, there are streams of water over my life, of the trees. I will be free
Okay, what do we see that's similar in these verses? What thoughts?
Fire runs down with water.
Right, Jeremy. The thought of weeping, tears, water running down from the eyes. And again, we see again the daughter of my people being spoken of. All fitting with Jeremiah's way of writing. And Lamentations 2 and verse 22. Lamentations 2 and 22 I'll give to you, Annie, and Tim, I'll give you Jeremiah chapter 6. Jeremiah 6 and verse 25. So Lamentations 2 and 22, Annie? Okay, and Jeremiah 6 and 25.
Do not go out into the field. Don't walk by the way, because of the sword of the enemy. Fear is on every side.
What do you see that's similar to both of these verses?
Fear in the enemy.
Right, Jeremy. Yeah. Fear of the enemy. Terror. Terror on every side. You know, we take these verses to heart. and like verse 22 just began with thinking of God calling in the day of an appointed feast. The happiness, the joy that would be there. It's gone. There's terror on every side. No one escapes or survives in the day of the Lord's anger. And then in Jeremiah 6 and 25, again, the same thought. Don't go out in the field. Don't walk on the road. The enemy and terror is all around. So we see that Jeremiah, those were his thoughts. And the author of Lamentations also expected God to destroy the nations who rejoiced over Jerusalem's fall. And we see that in Lamentations chapter 4 in verse 21. And I'll give that reading to you, Jeff. Lamentations 4 and 21. And Mom, if you go back to the book of Jeremiah, back to chapter 49. Back to chapter 49 and verse 12. That'll be your reading. Jeremiah 49 and 12. And Jeff, you have chapter 4 and verse 21.
4:21. Rejoice and be glad, O daughter Edom, you who dwell in the land of Uz. The cup shall also pass over to you, and you shall become drunk and make yourself naked.
And Mom, Jeremiah 49 and 12.
And thus said the Lord, behold, those whose judgment was not to drink of the cup have assuredly drunk, and they are the one who will altogether go unpunished. You shall not go unpunished, but you shall surely do nothing.
Okay. Jeremiah knew. Well, he didn't expect. He knew those that were mocking Judah at this time, mocking God's people, laughing at them, destroying them. Jeremiah knew that their day was to come also. God had a purpose for them, but his wrath was also going to be laid upon them. And besides the Lamentations here of Jeremiah, Jeremiah had also written others. Kind of forgot this, but if you go back to 2 Chronicles, chapter 35. 2 Chronicles 35 and verse 25, we read here, we spoke about Josiah not last week, I guess a few weeks ago. But we read here in verse 25, then Jeremiah chanted a lament for Josiah. And all the male and female singers speak about Josiah in their lamentations to this day. And they made them an ordinance in Israel. Behold, they are also written in the Lamentations. So just again, a thought more, and you look, it helps us get into the Jeremiah's nature, into what type of man he was. Not only deep thinking, but deep reverence for God and a deep understanding of what God will do.
In comparison to the other prophets, like, I'm not sure if I'm quoting right, a couple of them had asked God, why am I living? Like, it's better to take my life. Why are you allowing me to suffer like this? But Jeremiah didn't. When in comparison to what God had said that Peter wept bitterly, he bitterly to the point like he doesn't know what to do. But in Judas Iscariot case, he wept bitterly, he was sorry, but what did he do? He ended up killing himself. A lot of people don't want to live to see this tragedy, and especially to be taken to Babylon for 70 years, to endure all that time of punishment and grief. That just goes to show the kind of person that Jeremiah is. To pursue and to take it and to pray and to beg God for help, and not the easy way out is better I die. Let kill me.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, Jeremiah never sought for that way out, did he? Instead, he lamented. He wept over the results that Judah had put themselves in. Well, having said that, we'll move on then to the date, the fun section. We're asked what period of time in Judah's history, I think we've probably answered this, but provides the setting for Lamentations. What period of time?
Captivity.
Right, Jeremy, right. Lamentations paints a very vivid picture of the land of Judah and Jerusalem following its destruction at the hands of the Babylonians. Again, if you go back to chapter 1 in Lamentations, chapter 1, I think we read I already read the first 3 verses. We just read 4 and 5. Jeremy, I'll get you to read 4 and Naomi 5. We just finished that reading off to verse 5.
The ways of Zion do mourn, because none come to the solemn feast. All her gates are desolate, her priests sigh, her virgins are afflicted, and she is in bitterness.
Her foes become the head, her enemies prosper, because the Lord has afflicted her for the multitude of her transgressions. Her children have gone away captives before the foe.
You know, what a vivid picture when we think about it, of the glory of Jerusalem. And now it's just utter despair accompanies the devastation that's been laid upon it. And we look at our timeline again. Remember, the kingdom, Israel was divided in 931 BC, and then Israel is carried off, is conquered by Assyria, and Judah now fell to the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, in 586 BC, and Jeremiah was taken to Egypt. And we read that in Jeremiah chapter 43, verses 1 to 7. He is carried off to Egypt, and therefore we think Lamentations was most likely written in 586, the later part of 586, or the earlier part of 585, is when Jeremiah wrote it. So having heard the bell, we won't have time to get into our next section, but we'll begin next week then with the purpose of Lamentations, and we'll look at the historical section.